The following is a fan-made chapter reading of the Pale Web serial novel by J.C. McCrae. The original text can be found at palewebserial.wordpress.com. If you'd like to donate to the author, please go to patreon.com/wildbow. Thank you for listening. Stolen Away, 2.6, Verona. Verona studied the echo, which seemed to be the politically correct term for the ghost. The woman was a projection of a person going through a series of actions in various standing positions, leaning against the wall, standing in a defensive posture with her head down and shoulder drawn forward, pacing. She flickered between images in a messy way that didn't seem perfectly timed, and ran into herself in places, prompting splashes of crimson, as flesh dissolved into stubborn puffs or waves of echo stuff. Hair became like dust, clothing like strands. She wasn't see-through, but the gummy, blurry mess at the edges made for a kind of translucent web or wreath that surrounded and backed her, smoke that accumulated in exact amounts and quantity to what dissipated, splashes of liquid echo that hung in the air. "Can he breathe?" Avery asked. Verona turned her attention to the old man in the bed. He'd exhaled, and the exhalation had forced its way to the surface of the black gunk Alpiana had deposited on his face, forming a bubble that stubbornly refused to pop. He tried to drag in a breath, and the fluid drained down his throat instead. His body jerked. "No, lassie, he did not need too much. If anyone's having trouble breathing, it's me. This is not a pretty situation." "I'm trying to think about what we should do," Miss said, standing at the far end of the unlit room, by the head of the bed, where it was too dark for even Verona's light to penetrate. Verona wondered if she could hit the light switch, but there was no guarantee it wouldn't hurt Alpiana for the room to be that bright. Miss went on to say, "I might step away for a moment, stir up the goblins, and ask John to patrol. The problem is, what would we do with them if they were close enough to find? Murder would invite more problems. Anyone that close may be too determined to easily scare. A disappearance invites further investigation." "Wilhelm, Miss," Alpiana said, "ask him many a man who'll face doing a bogey sort, and still walk double time away from a fay now." "I suppose we must. I'll do that. John and Wilhelm, a quick patrol around the boundaries of Kennet. See if anyone has camped out somewhere, or if they're sending bound others in as tools. If they're stealing eyes and using them to make observation tools, there'll be a supply chain. As for you four, I've still got me rounds, miss, but we'll be needing to check there isn't anything more nefarious still lurking. Summonings, practice efforts, any traces of the kind of practice they use. Try not to tip them off that we have that quick or organized a response." Slightly annoyed, Alpiana spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "I'll be careful, I'm not some daub, can't tell me earth from a dimple in someone else's ball bag." She looked at the girls. "Sorry." "I don't have much idea what the last part meant," Avery said. "I worry," Miss said, "and you haven't dealt with predatory practitioners before." "Aye, but I've kept me nose out of it for this long." "What's the danger?" Lucy asked. Miss answered, "Conventional modern practitioners are organized on more of a level playing field with one another, while treating others as more of a resource than a threat. They know how to counteract others, limit our movements or options, and will try to corner us. Their best way to one-up one another or gain a foothold in their internal politics is to have more tools in their toolboxes. They would collect us. If we cannot disarm the situation, you might find you have no more patrons, no more gifts, and some right scabby bastards who would do away with 3 wee lassies before they could grow up to be competition, Possibly, Miss said. I've already explained to the girls that someone could try to declare themselves Lord. Which is like someone trying to declare themselves the next Carmine Beast? Verona asked, jumping into the discussion in an effort to contribute. They'd declare themselves, and others would take notice and jump in, and there'd be infighting and a great deal of mess, Miss said, possibly ending in disaster for Kennet and the surrounding region. Verona nodded. I'll go rouse our warriors, Miss said. If I don't find you again in the next 10 minutes, call me. I'm glad you're handling this, miss. Puts me heart more at ease. Should we treat this like a crime scene? Lucy asked. The deed wasn't done here, Alpiana said. I think there ain't much point. Verona turned her sight on and swept her eyes across the room, looking for anything that stood out. It let her see in the dark, and it highlighted the small details. Dings on the wall, little bits of lint on the floor. A pill that had fallen from the top of the dresser, wedging in between the dresser's leg and the baseboard at the bottom end of the wall. When she looked at the corner, Miss was gone. Could we interview the echo? Verona asked, looking at the ghost. You might be in for a dose of disappointing if you try. Echoes are a wee bit bampot, stuck saying the same things. It's worse when they're damaged, see? Narrows down what they can be. Hey, Lucy said, approaching the echo. She winced as it flickered, arm moving towards Lucy's head. Be gentle, They're thins especial fragile. Maybe I should do it instead, Lucy? Avery suggested. Lucy gave Avery an annoyed look, then stepped back to give Avery room to approach. Verona investigated the pills. She couldn't decipher the meaning or intent. There was a pair of wedding rings and an old pocket watch resting on the dresser. Hi, Avery said, gentle. The echo whispered. What did you say? Avery asked. Verona popped open the pocket watch, then closed it. No portrait or anything inside. She looked at the wedding ring. Can you tell us what happened? Lucy asked. I don't want to talk about it, Mama, the ghost murmured. Maybe ease in? Avery asked. What's your name, ma'am? The woman whispered something. Verona picked up the wedding ring, turned it over in her hand. There was an inscription. She's Bev. The ghost flickered, changing position. The other two girls jumped, which made Verona smirk. I'm Bev, and you are? The ghost asked. Avery, Avery said. She's not asking you, you wet tube, Alpiana said, finding a perch on the bed, sitting on the old man's chest. She's a mess of memories, bad enough the world kept 'em long after the heart stopped beating. Stuck walking in circles until she gets forgotten by that world too. I didn't think it hurt to be nice, Avery said. Bev, Lucy said, what's happened to your eyes? Bev flickered. She wore sunglasses, but they didn't fit on her damaged face. She distorted, the sunglasses tearing free and dropping to the ground. She stood there with a damaged mess of crimson and gray instead of a head, her body flickering. What happened? Lucy asked. Have to sidestep that one, lassie. She be like a house of cards. There's a car missing, Dinna want to go reminding her of that, or you'll hurt her. Hurt? Avery asked. I think she's a bad memory, pressed into existence, Verona guessed. She expresses herself through scenes from her old life that were tied to high emotion, based on what Charles explained before. If we make her live out a scene where we bring her attention, for lack of a better word, to the missing EYES, or ask her to use them when she can't, it damages her and makes her forever weaker. Is that it? You've got it, lassie. Bev, Lucy said. The image flickered, more of a head than before. Are you okay? Lucy asked. The image consolidated, a little blurrier at the edges than before. Bev had her head bowed, hand at her forehead, covering her eyes. I get by. Clay's dad mellowed with age, or he got too weak, the echo said, again with the hand at the forehead, shielding the eyes. A bruise was visible at the edge of the damaged portion of the face. I have that to look forward to. If we ask her about earlier, will she try to express herself? Lucy asked. She might, Alpiana said. She leaned over the old man's face and barfed out more black stuff. Reaching into it, she gripped the old man's jaw and dragged it through the tar until it was nearly at his collarbone. Then she shoved her arm into the darkness all the way down to the shoulder. Gunk overflowed onto the bed. Cool. When did this happen, Bev? Lucy asked Alpiana. The echo answered, This afternoon. I'm not especially keen to discuss it, Father. Dad father or religious father? Avery asked. Religious, I'd be guessing, given the era, Alpiana said. Not so many back then, were pouring their wee hearts out to their daugh. We're on your side here, Lucy said. You should be safe here. Careful there, lassie, should she? In the company of 3 local practitioners who are invested in protecting the others and people of Kennet? Lucy asked. That works. Just making sure. If you need advice, then the closer you get to what she heard back then, the better off you'll be. You're part of our flock, Verona said. I'm afraid I'm already a lost sheep, Fa. The ghost raised her face mid-sentence, hand dropping from her face, as she made to make eye contact with her conversation partner, and the resulting damage ripped part of her head off. Oops, Verona said. You cannot avoid it, lassie. She's going to need to try and open those eyes, and each time she does, she'll diminish. She's no so long for this here world. Your children are safe, Bev, Lucy told the image. You're safe. Relax. The image consolidated, even blurrier than before. The children aren't safe, Ma, Bev said. He thrashes them. I can't even send them to school the next day, and then people come asking questions. I'd go, but our account at the bank is in his name. I can save up pennies and change, but for what? Lucy answered, You can. Alpiana lurched forward to the very edge of the bed and pressed 3 fingers against Lucy's mouth. They were still a bit mucky from being shoulder deep inside the man's neck area. Lucy backed away a step, wiping at her mouth. Take care there, Lucy. Reminding an echo it can go is a surefire way to get you rid of one. Lucy nodded, making a face as she tried to wipe away at her mouth. How do we bring up the attack but not remind her about the eyes, or bring the scene to a point where she'd be opening her eyes? Avery asked. I can think of a way, Verona said, looking at the bed. It was big enough for 2 people. It's not pretty, though. We do not need pretty, Verona. We need answers. A little bit of pretty would be nice, Avery said. I think we should be mindful of the kind of practitioners we're becoming. It's easy to do stuff we later regret. Bev, Verona said, I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Bev flickered, then appeared in the bed, a phantom blanket drawn over her. She lay beside Clay, her back to him. Alpiana moved back, sitting by Clay's feet. She didn't speak. It's night. Eyes are closed. There's nothing and nobody to really look at. We digest the events of the day, Verona said, and I guess emotions stay strong enough that we don't rest easy. And they can get stored by an echo. The crummy people in our lives know we're a captive audience, so they talk at us instead of processing and facing their own deeds. Useful, Lucy said. Bev, can we talk about what happened today? I want to sleep, Clay. Please, Lucy asked. Bev started and cut out. Verona worried something had broken again. But Bev had just skipped ahead. Monstrous, more than anything I've seen. It cut off at the end, like there was more to be said. It was a monster that did this? Lucy asked. Monstrous, more than anything I've seen, then left, stormed out and away. Good to know, Lucy murmured. Hurt me, hurt the... Bev jumped across the room to the place she'd been standing before. Others. Not the only set of EYES the monster stole? Avery asked. Do you even want me to stay, Clarence? Clarence, not Clay? Avery asked. Probably Clay is a nickname, Verona guessed. Ah, what time did this happen? Lucy asked. The kids just got back from school, Ma. I should go look after them. This afternoon? Lucy asked. Yes, the ghost said. She was disintegrating more and more. Anything else? Lucy asked, looking back. What did it look like? Verona asked. Black mood, furious, Bev told them, flickering between a few different positions to deliver each word. Ugly, not someone I recognize. That's all I got, Verona said. Me too, I think, Lucy said. Can we give her a good sending off? Avery asked. They looked at Alpiana, who shrugged. What do you want to do? Avery asked Bev. Bev moved back to the bed, lying with her back to the old man, who was smothered by the black stuff. If I went to pack up the kids and hop in a car to drive away, would you really fight to stop us? Bev asked. There was a pause. I'm not saying I will, Bev added, defensively, responding to a voice they weren't privy to. I'd never, don't worry. Don't get upset, please. I wish you'd... She cut off again. She reappeared at the end of the room, eyeless, standing with her head bowed, not saying or doing much except standing there. Please tell me she got away, Avery said. Oh, aye, took another unhappy year, but the wee lass stole away in the night with the bairns. Did not look back, never called. Most knew what Clarence here did, shunned him. He stuck by the ones who did not care for 25 more years. Friends at the bar. Then they passed and left him alone and bitter. I've been visiting him for decades now, 5 or 6 times a week, if I can catch him, before insomnia stirs him awake. Bev, Avery said, go, be with the kids. You're supposed to be away and safe, far from here. You got away. I'm pretty sure another existence is waiting for you. The echo dissolved the conflicts between images worse than before, except now she didn't make up for what she lost, bashing herself to pieces. Lucy folded her arms. Should we go then? See if this monster that took her eyes left a trail, or if there's any trace out there? I have to admit, I was hoping Miss would be back and she could point the way. This isn't my talent. No, we should probably get going, Lucy said. It's already late. I'll wrap up here, then, Alpiana said. The darkness that covered Clarence's head and chest was like a pool she could reach into, stirring things up and changing things around. The flesh seemed moldable. She pushed ribs aside and then stayed pushed up and away. She worked within, hands in the black stuff. What's his nightmare tonight about? Lucy asked. His daughter's daughter turns up, sweet as anything. Wants to know who her granda is, and he's ailin'. She mops his brow and makes his meals nice. His heart rests easy and light, Alpiana said, peering into the darkness. Then a departed friend of his laughs about what a braw lad he was, putting his wee pretty wife in her place. The girl leaves with a few choice words, and the culture is left all alone, gets put in a crummy, lonesome old folks' home, where he gets as good as he ever got, while he's an old man too weak to even raise his arms to defend himself. A dream that feels like a right decade, sitting heavy on the heart. He gets 5 or more of those a week? Lucy asked. More of 'em as o' late, Alpiana said. Dreams I meant to give out are getting meaner. It's that carmine beast's absence in it. Subtle at first, but it gets worse by the day. She stirred some things around in his chest, plucked out something eel-like from the darkness, tilted her head back and swallowed it in a single gulp. The old man spasmed, back arcing, hands fumbling for a grip on sheets. Bubbles formed at the mouth. He thrashed to little avail. A urine stain spread across his crotch area, soaking the sheets. We're done, Alpiana said brightly. Echo's put away. He's set for tonight. It's his own head doing him in. I'm just making some use of it, greasing the big ticking wheels with what he's left unsettled. He'll sleep till morning sun. Let's go investigate this happening. Hopefully this will not take all night, aye? Yeah, Lucy said, or my mom will wonder where I am. Alpiana dipped her hand into the darkness and pulled out something white and wispy, like a bridal veil that twitched. She walked to the wall, and as her hair pulled away from the old man, she pulled the black stuff with her. He was left untouched, rib cage and jaw where they were supposed to be. The urine stain remained where it was. He continued twitching and vocalized a bit. Alpiana used the wispy veil stuff to paint out a chalky outline around the closet door. What's this? Verona asked. It's harder to bring all 3 of you lassies with me if I'm slipping between worlds. It's hard enough for me alone. I'll usually use the ways. The ways? Avery asked. You can get anywhere walking on foot, even the paths if you walk long enough. Some places are closer to the warrens, the abyss, or the spirit. The toll isn't so heavy expensive if the way's shorter. Elsewise you pay the toll direct. Use a wee bit of spirit to open up the spirit ways. The spirit world? Verona asked. Directly there, Alpiana said, hauling open the closet door. The world on the other side was the old man's bedroom, but flipped around. The three of them followed Alpiana in through the door, into the room that was covered in scribblings, like two people had been fighting to cover the room in their own handwriting. Lots of awful in here, aye? Alpiana asked. There was a vague silhouette on the bed, with what looked like 9 ghostly figures of size, ranging from adult to dormouse, crouched over him. Most of them shied back away from Alpiana. I'm not going to grab you like I grabbed your kin, Alpiana told them, annoyed. Why the spirit world? Verona asked. Aren't there better places to look? The ruins? The spirit world makes a good first look-in for the same reasons it's bonny good for new practitioners like yourselves. A good ground level for a start. They left the house, which had less writing on the walls than in the bedroom, out into the spirit world version of Kennet. It was essentially the same layout, brighter in some ways, darker in others. Houses more or less lined up to where houses were supposed to be. There were figures so transparent that they were hard to make out when looked at directly, moving this way and that. What are we looking for? Lucy asked. Alpiana had pulled ahead a bit and came back. Come on, quick with ye. This ain't your world. Do not be getting distracted. Feet aren't so important as will now. Will? Avery asked. To get where you goin'? Distance and measure did not matter so much either. Focus now. What are we looking for? Lucy asked. Disturbances, Alpiana said. Mostly it looked the same. Graffiti and decorations were everywhere, and they hadn't been there before. The road was layered in a 1/4 inch of water, and their footsteps splashed. There were no people, and there was a sheen on things that made it feel more cartoony, even though that was the wrong word. The cared-for houses were more polished, and the polish had a faint rainbow hue. Abandoned places were buried in a muck of vague silhouettes. It highlighted contrasts. The sky above them was monochrome, but for the variations in the clouds, which seemed like they were more set for framing than for anything. Why would someone come here? Verona asked. She scanned the area with her eyes. The buildings seemed to be less important for the fact that they were buildings, and more important because they were anchors for other things to gather around. The further they walked or traveled on all fours, as Alpiana was doing, the more she realized how unmoored this all was. A didn't lead neatly to B. You could come here to petition the big spirits. We do not got nothing or no one especial big. If you drew out a big, important diagram or planned a big ritual, you might want to check and clear the area in a few different overlapping places first. Depending on how you went about it, you might smoke a pipe with some special leaves to pay your visit, square things away with any local spirits. Most practitioner families will have their wee apprentices and bairns do that part. Easy, build a relationship. The paths notes Miss gave me said that you can use the paths to get someplace faster, but there's a risk. Is this like that? Och, not so much, no. The spirit's ways are a good way to get where you need to be if you're looking for a feelin' or idea. Not so much if you want to get anywhere. Bit of a mire, see? I see, Avery said. Bit of a tangent, Lucy said, but in the interest of giving credit where credit is due, and not complaining at you two all the time, I was pretty happy with how that ghost interview went. Verona smiled. I didn't contribute much, Avery said. You did not contribute, Lucy said. I think having someone taking a step back, watching our flanks, making sure we're traveling in the right directions, that's important. It might be good to make a habit of that. If we notice we're not contributing much to the conversation, we can step back and look at the big picture, whether that's moral or strategic or whatever else. Avery nodded. I'm not seeing much disturbance, Verona noted, but I'm not sure what it looks like normally, so it's hard to tell. You'd notice, lassie. Numpty spirit things running this way and that. Mess, disaster. The spirit reflects what the real world hides. We're looking for the hidden, Lucy said. Aye, but it's been too long. Hours now since the blighted eye stealer came through. Can we ask the spirits directly? Lucy asked. No. Some places you can, but they're the places where men play heed to the spirits and spiritual. To superstition, to symbols and meanings in tea leaves, aye? They put a peedy amount of themselves in the spirit, and the spirit gets a peedy bit of humanity. Enough humanity to talk? Verona asked. Alpiana nodded. I would have thought we were more spiritual than that, Lucy said. We have churches. A lot of people put stock in religion in Kennet. Aye, but not in the way that counts, see? Not many who see the heavens crack, flash, and rumble, cleaving a tree in twain, and think there might be something to it. Gotcha, Lucy said. The spirit world is shrinking then, as people stop believing? I dunno about shrinking, lassie, but it's changin'. All things do. The individual parts of Kennet were moving around, it felt like. If no members of their group were paying attention, a place could find its way to somewhere it shouldn't be. It was as if the roads were actually a deep water, and each major chunk of the town was adrift, floating by one another. Here and there were growths, something like a combination of a tumor and a cloud, or a fungus with blurry, cloudy wisps growing from it, in peach hues that dissolved to white. Near the school, near the arena and the dance studio. Disturbance, Avery said. She indicated the dance studio. The bird people things on the roof are acting like something happened. The things looked like shadow people, pale and indistinct, perched on the rooftop. In place of arms, they had triangular shapes that could be described as wings. They're carrying swords, like the ones I see with my sight, Lucy noted. Hurt and harm done, Alpiana said. They're omens. Something bad is going to happen to someone tonight. Avery began to jog over. Can we do something? Lucy asked. Step in? Is that allowed? It may be allowed, aye, but I do not see what you might do. It may look and rightly feel like we're close, but we ain't. It's a plight of the spirit, see? That it cannot change much about the real, and the real can't much impact the spirit. Takes a skilled hand and some power to break the. Lucy headed over. Alpiana looked at Verona. I think they'll want to try, Verona said. We'll get sidetracked 9 ways from Sunday if we cannot stay on task, Alpiana said. But she didn't argue or fight, and gave chase. There were more omens collecting, more shadow figures in various shapes, too indistinct to clearly see, but suggestive of animals, people, and things. A kid that looked like he was wearing a cat hoodie, a woman's silhouette, tall, thin, and see-through, conveying some agitated emotion. They gathered at the windows and parted as the other 2 girls got there to make room. Verona caught up. Even in the spirit world, she was slower than the other 2. This time she couldn't even blame the fact that her legs were a bit shorter. Through the window they saw only more spirit. The translucent figures overlapped, some winging in the air. More omens these days, Alpiana said, reminding us that if we cannot get this Carmine Beast business squared off, wrong things are comin'. More omens, more violent dreams, more violent, dangerous others. There's more room for them, aye. Lots of omens now. This here's a special bad one, or something's off. Could someone be making something bad happen? Avery asked. The omens were gathering inside. More and more, the darker overlaps, where 2 of the simple, silhouetted, winged figures were next to one another, suggested images. Alone they were so transparent they could be mistaken for tricks of the eye. 2 overlapping made a deep shadow. 3 overlapping made black. There was black to suggest the edge of a person, a hand. Movement as someone ran. It was already evening when we went to see Alpiana, Lucy said. Who's at the dance and yoga studio this late, after dinner? The serious kids, Verona said. This is too mobile to be dance. It's definitely not yoga. It's not the gymnastics class, not with this many people on the floor. Cheerleading, Avery said. Oh no, from what I've heard, cheerleading is the sport for girls getting injured. Is someone going to snap their neck? Please tell me nobody's going to snap their necks. With this many omens, I would not be surprised, lass. You may want to look away now. We just lost a classmate earlier this week. You're telling me we may lose another? Avery asked. No, that's not okay. I do not say it was, lassie. It's the way of it. If you look, they're spirits of fatigue, raw with fat, loused and hunched over, spirits of frustration, gowpin spirits. Something was due to go wrong, Guy. We can't just leave it like that. If we called Miss now and sent her over, she can travel fast, right? I can't, Miss said. I couldn't intervene in that manner. Miss stood in the group of spirits around them. Overlapping translucent shapes provided the cover for her face and hands. You caught up, just in time to see a bit of cause for crying. Avery fidgeted. Overlapping omens created the shadow picture of what was happening in reality. The exercise. Girls doing flips, jumps, getting caught and lifted up. 2 girls standing on the shoulders of the girls below them. Another girl, smaller than the rest, propelled into the air to be part of the formation. She spun in the air 180 degrees. Hands of the girls below and to either side of her reached out to support her. An omen silhouette with larger wings than the others, sword in hand, dove. It never touched her. It only followed as she went up, lost her footing, slipped over, and plunged down on the far side. Her body mostly vertical, feet down. 1 foot down. It met her as she met ground. Sword met ankle, and the impact shook almost every other omen nearby, scattering them. Dust exploded up and away from the impact site, and solidified. The girl became briefly visible, as if she existed in this world. And an echo is born, a wee one, Alpiana said. The lassie lives, at least. The image of the girl remained, flickering, repeating the event as Bev had replayed bits of conversation. Only the girl's silhouette remained, framed by a wreath of hands that reached for her to give support, many of them hesitating, not knowing what to do. Her foot remained attached by only one small part of the ankle. It dangled, wobbling and twisting, the toe pointing toward the knee as it rotated, largely disconnected from everything above it. Bone was clearly visible in the silhouette image. Adults gathered near the girl, and spirits moved inside, through the window that had no glass. They went to the solid growths that were like the mushrooms and tumors. The spirits have their mana, the story will spread. Different people will take away different things from the event, Miss explained, and different spirits will become stronger. Even with the intervening spirits and images of adults, the girl was pretty clear to see, as if Verona watched with an X-ray vision. She strained to see details, to make out if there was anything hinky or unusual, and switched to using her sight. In this world it operated differently, closer to the adjustment of a camera focus, except it adjusted light and darkness, contrast, and the kind of spirits that were more or less transparent. She focused on the girl and made out details. A blue jersey top worn over a leotard, crimped hair, the expression. Verona looked away, feeling a bit as if she'd just stuck her hand onto a hot stove. She could look at dangling feet all day, but that? Nah. Looks like it's Melissa from our class, Verona commented. What? Avery asked. No. Please tell me the damage being depicted is exaggerated like so many of the other things in this world. Feet don't do that, do they? They can, Lucy said. I remember when I was little, I wanted a trampoline. I argued to my mom and to Paul as well that it'd be good exercise. My mom wasn't keen because of her nursing background. Booker showed me a vid where the same thing happened. Teenager came down too hard, wrong angle, wrong vibration, sheared off. Worse than this. I don't think injuries this bad necessarily happen without the trampoline. It could be the omen influencing things, Verona observed. Miss, Alpiana said, the omens are too many for such a small event. I was going to ignore them, because the dance place is in the middle of town, and our invaders have to be outside, They're outside the city limits. The men are on task. It's hanky, miss. I'm not sure what it could be, Miss said, looking in. Most of the omens had scattered, but some lingered. An ill wind? Omens are tied to certain animals, like crows. In seasons like this, whole murders will flock to a tree. It could be a parallel. Crows being associated with omens, then the crows arrive and bring omens with, especially as a byproduct of other practice. Verona adjusted her sight to study the omens, adjusting the camera focus, darkening everything, highlighting the vague, gingerbread man-like shadows with wings. The limbs became more apparent, sinewy and narrow, wearing the looser shadow of the gingerbread man's shape like clothing. "Careful, Verona," Miss said. "Careful why?" Practices of seeing, whether it's the future, studying omens, looking out over distances, a good rule of thumb to keep in mind is that when you look, they can look back. "Another entanglement thing?" Avery asked. "In a sense. Look too hard for your demise and death looks back, and he may find you sooner. Look too hard for omens." "Got it," Verona said, now keeping more of an eye out for any omens that were turning their eyeless, mouthless heads back toward her. She gave them another quick once-over, trying not to stare too much at any one in particular. They were black, like matte leather, veins and sinews standing out on lanky limbs. When they hunched over or prowled, as Melissa was helped onto a stretcher, their spines stood out in distinct relief. Their ragged wings reached down and draped the ground around them. One had a scar, hard to make out in the gloom inside the building, circular around the neck. When it caught the scant light, it looked bronze. "One of them is wearing a collar," Verona said. "Which one?" Miss asked. She stepped through the fog of transparent, immaterial spirits until she was right behind Verona. She dropped down. Verona pointed. The omen turned to look at her, and Verona looked away, immediately striding away until the line of sight was broken by the wall beside the window. Miss remained where she was, hunched over, hands in the pockets of her long coat, her black hair blowing across her face, staring at the omen. "Belanger," Miss said. "What's that?" Lucy asked. "The culprit in the stealing of eyes. I suppose the logic I just outlined would apply here. A young female practitioner sends an omen spirit to go sniffing around, because it has a nose, so to speak, for trouble. Where one omen settles, others gather, until events come to pass. She went looking for trouble, and trouble happened, when it might not otherwise." "She hurt Melissa through her carelessness?" Avery asked. "Hurt was set to happen, see," Alpiana said, "but the minging lass might have made the situation worse, sticking that particular nose into things." "Who is she? What is she?" Lucy asked. "Alpiana said they used a monster to steal the eyes." "A tool, yes," Miss said, staring down the omens. Verona continued to walk back, pacing. A bit of distance was the prescription for entanglement, and she had told Lucy she was trying to be careful. "Charles said his old friend was an augur," Verona said. He said they were going to make a watchdog, and now we've got eyes and omens, and that feels augury." "It is. The Belangers are the same augurs that troubled Charles. They also have a not insignificant stake in the magical class I gave you the notes on," Miss said. "Nicolette Belanger is the student of Alex Belanger. I don't know the exact relation, but I suspect they are family. Nicolette was prowling around, but she was nowhere near Kenneth. I distracted her. I thought we had longer before she found us." "She must have found a metaphorical thread to pull." "You've done that a few times," Lucy said. Thinking you had more time than you did, but our awakening is the other big one. A trap many others fall into, I'm afraid. When you count your existence in centuries, those who move ahead by days can catch you off guard." "I'll have to keep that in mind for when I become other," Verona thought. Maybe if. "Can we trace it or track it?" Lucy asked. "I think that would be dangerous. They would converge on us as a flock. There are other ways and other threads to follow. For now, we need to know how much damage is done." "Damage?" "Information is power. Practitioners can counter another, cut off its movements, and bind it. But to do that, they have to know what type of other they're dealing with," Verona interrupted. "It's why you've been so secretive, you've said." "Yes, they need information first. The Belongers, as it happens, are exceptional when it comes to gathering information. Clairvoyance, future sight, omens, seeing sendings, and all manners of using the sight. They are information gatherers and they sell that information. You didn't notice anything wrong last night, Alpiana? No? Then we have roughly 13 hours they may have been active. Bev the Echo said they took her eyes this afternoon. Good, Miss said. Let's see if she was the start, the middle, or the end of their work. Ruins? Alpiana asked. Please, if you'd forge the way. Best if we cut through the factory. They started moving double time, and it was a little easier to move than before. Easier to move when she was beside her friends. Learning how to best move through this world or these worlds was going to be another thing she needed to practice. She was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her legs, and everything to do with whatever part of her was being drawn on to push forward in the spirit world. The factory wasn't too far. Scribblings and etchings surrounded it. Some of them moved. Alpiana, Lucy said, can we ask you some questions? Now? Alpiana asked. Please, if you must. Did you have any involvement in the troubles tonight? Verona raised an eyebrow, giving Lucy a look. Why would I have a hand in this? Your earth is out the window, lassie. What sort of good does it do to me to shit up on me night's rounds, bring a practitioner to our door, and put us all in some raw heavy danger? Yes or no, please? No, you bloody tit. No involvement sides the help I've given you. I think you've offended her, Avery whispered. I'm asking to cover the bases. Your own base might as well be uncovered or hanging out in the cold breeze, aye? Did you play any part in the Carmine Beast's disappearance or death? Not to the best of me knowledge. Did you know it? Have any interaction with it? Verona asked. No, we saw each other once, 50 years back, but that's all. The Sable Prince was the one I worked with most. Prince? Avery asked. The title suggests who they were before, Miss explained. Were John Styles to take the seat, he would be the Carmine Dog. The choir would become the Carmine Choir. The Sable Prince was once a higher spirit. Prince was the easiest title to give him. Did you have anything against the beast? Lucy asked. No, except that Tit went and died, and it's made me rounds messier. Brought trouble like tonight's doing on my hair. Do you have any suspicion or knowledge about who might have done it? I'm not the one to ask, lassie. No idea. I do not pay much mind to the others. The fairy are fun. Marischka will give me a story for a spider web or a trace of anything odd I find on the nightly rounds. Bit of spirit here, bit of echo there. Anything notable lately? Around the time things started getting hairy, or the Carmine Beast disappeared. No, a laddie got too drunk around the holidays, drove his car into a ditch. A hunter shot his friend. Not connected to the Carmine Beast, he was a daub who did not seem like he could tell his horse from his ear. As they passed a wall, Verona pulled out her pen and dragged it along one of the words scribbled on the wall. Jobless. The pen picked up the word. She put it down a few feet down the same wall. A spirit, head peering over the wall, made a sound like a strangled scream. Handless arms pressed to its head as it saw the damage. Verona looked to Miss for clarity and got none. In another circumstance, would you have taken Melissa's echo and given it to them? Avery asked. Might have done, I. What would she do with it? That relates to this next destination of ours here. They reached the factory. If you need to go to the warrens where the goblins deal with other goblins, you'll want to come this way and turn left, go that way. Not sure why you would want to, especially without a guide, but I'm telling you now. There was a bit of collapsed structure, and it looked like part of the collapse was over a murky stairwell. Not a fan of goblins? Lucy asked. They're fine, really, but I do not have much cause to deal with them. Here, the ruins. Keep yourselves close now. Miss pulled out an umbrella and shook it out to its full breadth, her hands hidden by the umbrella's fabric first, then by the fact that she held the umbrella with the hand furthest from them. The umbrella's edge hid her face. The landscape was again like Kennet. This time it seemed like everything was in the place it should be, instead of maybe being connected by association rather than place and landmark. Rain came down in a torrent that limited visibility past 100 feet or so. The roads were gone, replaced with ragged chasms. Crosswalks were rope bridges. Buildings were muted, like the pounding rain had worn down the edges and driven the rooftops a bit closer to the building foundations. There were no lights, and there was almost no motion. The sky, though it was hard to make out, was like television static. So was the water of the river, which was far higher than it was in reality, the static turning near white where it crested and formed violent froth. A good portion of the water flowed into a chasm, disappearing into the darkness. Echoes were everywhere, flickering, wandering. The guide for the forest ribbon trail mentioned the ruins, Avery said. It did, Miss said. Verona shivered. The rain had already soaked her through. It grinds down ghosts? Avery asked. Yes, Miss said. She walked briskly, and the three of them followed. Verona pulled her bag around to her front, with the intent of getting her hat, but when Miss crossed the first rope bridge, Verona decided to prioritize holding on to the rope, hugging the bag to her chest with her other hand. I'm going to have to change this bandage, Lucy said, soaked through already. There was an echo on the far side of the street, flickering across a series of forms with enough consistency and pattern that the forms appeared interconnected. A man staggering forward, streaked in blood that thinned out with the rain, his arms reaching out to either side and behind him, where they blended in with another version of himself. Shoulder connected to upper arm, which connected to elbow, then forearm, then wrist, and back the way it had come. Wrist to forearm, to elbow, to upper arm, to shoulder. There were ruined versions of him that had no legs, the lower body missing, and the intervening space raw and bloody, so he left a trail of blood behind him. He craned his head around, mouth open, tongueless and toothless, head flickering to change which direction he was looking, rather than actually moving. He had no eyes, only a clawed-out section. Recent wound, Miss said, looking. More recent than— Bev, you said? Yes, Lucy said. The Belanger's eye-stealing other may be close. Lucy pulled off the chain at her neck. The dog tag, 2 keys in the ring were stuck on it. She retrieved the ring, disconnecting the chain. Verona got her hat, then pulled out the box with the hot lead in it, handing it to Lucy. She pulled the hat on. The bleakness of this place reminds me of the Hungry Choir's realm, Avery said. If you were to map out the connections between worlds, that one would be a close sibling or child of this one. The ruins are a place of the eroding abstract, incarnates and echoes. The Hungry Choir is of that abstract, a living ritual rooted in the incarnate. Case in point, Avery said. She pointed. There was a figure that could have been mistaken for an echo, but it didn't flicker. A waif, standing in the rain, watching them. There were more echoes. Most were far more monstrous than Bev had been, or far less, being torn apart by the rain. The others native to this place are predators that feast on echoes, Miss said. Echoes will find their roots here, what you see in reality as the tips of the icebergs, if they're complex or multifaceted enough to have icebergs. When they're spent, they dissolve out here, reduced back down to spirit stuff, if they aren't taken apart for other purposes. What purposes? Verona asked. Some might make others and send them out. Others might be similar to Alpiana, building nightmares or scenarios, like a funnel spider might build a web, but using scenes and memories instead of webbing. Nascent incarnations might seek out echoes that tie to their natures, an incarnation of innocence eating child, and elderly others until it has the strength to take form in our world. The eye thief could easily be something of that same typology. Those native others will feast on you or me if they can, lassie, so keep your eye out. Avery and Verona, each walking on one side of Alpiana, looked at the girl. Dinna be looking so terrible scared, lassies. Most will let things too slow and broken down to move very fast. So long as you dinna walk into an open mole and get gulped down, you should be okay. Good to know, Avery said. I wasn't really scared, just going to say, Verona said. More like I'm interested. I stand corrected, lassie. There was a cluster of other echoes, all eyeless. "What a scabby mess this is," Alpiana complained. "What am I supposed to do with this when it comes to making nightmares? It's like being asked to make axes and you've no wood for the handles. How am I to make it personal if the echoes of those persons are half gone to minging pieces?" "I think that's the least of our concerns," Miss said. Verona's sight was more like it was supposed to be in the midst of all this. It didn't really help with seeing through the rain, but it did help with seeing the things the torrent of rain might have covered up. "Turn on that sight of yours if it's not already on, Eve, Luce. It's useful," Verona said. She dug out her mask, putting it on to further clarify things. "Will do," Lucy said. Miss explained, "This is a place that lives in the abstract, bearing the entirety of the wear and damage of the day-to-day. Echoes that don't even manifest in reality will lurk here. Necromancers will often travel to this place, or places like it, to traffic in dead spirits. Incarnate practitioners who specialize in things like the hungry choir ritual, or dealings with a specific incarnation, such as dream or bondage, will have cause to come here. If this keeps doing this sorry path, I'll be crossing these fingers of mine that you girls decide you want me for a familiar. Would sure be nice to get a wee vacation when your work has gone on wiped earth over Fanny." Verona laughed. Lucy and then Avery joined her. "It's no a laughin' matter, lassie." "Then stop being so funny, jeez," Verona said, chuckling. She frowned a bit, not wanting to take her eyes off the things around them. "I gotta say, I understood you less than usual there." "Same," Avery added. "We were going to put off mentioning that to the girls," Miss said. "It's a decision older practitioners make." "Tell the lassies now," Alpiana said. "Dinna do any harm, will it?" "What's this?" Verona asked, interested. "There's a ritual that you can enact that ties you to an other. It will give you some talents or skills, and in exchange you give it a taste of mortality. As Alpiana alludes, it can be a break from their standard responsibilities, or the demands that they have for certain foods. A vampire, for example, would not need to drink blood. You'd be as dumb as a tit without a curve in it if you picked a vampire, I'll tell you that," Alpiana said. "Why?" Verona asked. "Also, I want to know everything about this." "Vampires?" Alpiana asked. "Familiars," Verona said. "Vampires are not what they are in your media," Miss said. "The closest analogue would be a drug addict in your world, penniless, desperate, and ground down by reality. Should you find one, it will likely be more scared of you than you are of it. Even if you weren't a practitioner, it would be so." "Got it," Avery said. "Sad." The seal of Solomon was far harsher to them than it was to most. Practitioners who want to extend their power and raise their status will often pick a familiar. Some families will have their children take a familiar early to establish a firm bond with one kind of other. The familiar grants power, awareness, and some extra innate ability, depending on what it is. Powerful or insidious familiars may overwhelm you through that connection that is formed, so be wary. Know your strength. "And in exchange they become mortal? They don't have to eat?" Lucy asked. Alpiana would not need to work. An other in the process of falling apart, such as the girl by candlelight who became the Edith that you now know, might be shored up. An option they could not take because the doom Matthew now houses would have destroyed them both. Fairy might seek it out to enrich their understanding of human experience. A goblin would be free to be active for more than a few hours at a stretch, when they normally sleep for 20 or so hours every day, and they would have easy passage over places with power and running water. "Sounds great," Avery said. "Aside from the risk of getting too big a familiar, why wouldn't we do this? Why wait?" "Because it is a lifelong commitment. The other would be with you until you died. You would want to be sure he or she was committed to the responsibility, that he or she was compatible with you. Families that choose familiars for their children will pick suitable and safe ones, negotiating well in advance if they don't simply expect their child to adapt." "We were going to ask you about ways to level up and get stronger in case we ran into more trouble," Avery said. "There are 2 more ways. The implement is a tool that would shape how you use the practice. A lifelong commitment to being someone who wields a sword in coordination with the practice, if you will. It would shape how others see you and how the practice responds to you. It could be a cup, a wand, a scroll, or any other thing that reflects you as an individual. Could I pick my cell phone? Avery asked. The ways of others are old, and cell phones are new. The cell phone you pick today might well be outdated in 2 years and forgotten in 20. I would gently suggest, Avery Kelly, that if one's first thought is a cell phone, they aren't ready to pick an implement. Right, Avery said. The other choice one may make is to pick a domain, one place that will become yours, in which you are the true arbiter of its rules. If you have a place in mind, I could elaborate. But again, be aware. It's a lifelong commitment? Verona asked. Yes, Miss said. Something to think about. Verona liked to think that Alpiana was more her wavelength if she had to pick one now. Dark, easy to get along with, and Verona felt like she kinda got and liked what Alpiana did in the grand scheme of things. Maybe if she formed a firmer bond with the mayor, she could find a way to get her dad to a better place. Implement? Maybe a pen like her feather pen? Domain? She would rather skin a leg and foot and wade through salt than lock herself down to any one place. They walked through the pouring rain, crossing more rope bridges. They slowed as they approached a lumbering figure, faceless, that had 3 echoes gripped in its hands. One of the echoes a complex, interlinked series of images, the other 2 small and fading. It plunged all 3 into the river. One of the echoes screamed inarticulately. It projected something over the area, and Verona could see that something like a light that didn't shine, spreading out over the area. It hit her, and she found herself choking. Lucy and Avery did the same. It's just a trace of a fading memory, Miss said, encouraging, one hand in her pocket and the other holding the umbrella. Bear with it. The sensation faded. The local others seemed to be more densely packed in one area of the city near the downtown area, and the 5 of them, 3 girls, 1 miss, and 1 mayor, investigated as much as they could without passing under the nose of the strange others of the ruins. Verona was glad Alpiana had been right, that the local others weren't that interested in humans. They chased echoes by lumbering footsteps and awkward movements. Echoes were off in their own little worlds, memories walking in circles, as Alpiana had put it. This is the arena, Avery said. It was where the others had congregated in the greatest numbers. Echo and ruin other alike. You said that was where the Carmine Beast died? We traveled a circuit of all the other realms, including here, shortly after its demise, to be sure, Miss said. I did this one, Alpiana said. There was naught and nothin'. There's something going on now. Aye, Alpiana said, her brows knit together in concern. They navigated the rope bridge, crossed to the sidewalk, and weaved across the parking lot, avoiding the others who congregated and stood nearby. Circling around the back, they found more echoes and more others. Blood streaked the lot, like something huge had been dragged, leaking blood all the while. The streaks continued to the side road by the decrepit, rain-worn building. They disappeared into the darkness there. You missed this? Verona asked. I came this way weeks ago, and this was not here, Alpiana said. Even last week. Was the Carmine Beast's body stowed here? Lucy asked. Did someone move it, and recently? Nobody had an easy answer. This is tricky, because I fear that what I say next will make you suspicious of me. I swear to you, my intentions are for what is best for Kennet, and I have no part in this, no malfeasance in mind. I'm not attempting to distract you from this task we've charged you with, but you want to handle the more immediate problem? Verona asked. The augur who was spying on Kennet? Please, Miss said. As horrible as it may be to say, the Carmine Beast is a problem that will balance out and remedy in time. The loss of Kennet as the haven it is may be something we can never recover from. Verona stared at the landscape around them, at the streaks of blood. She tried to find details and found little. No footprints, nothing left behind but the occasional hair as long as her arm, or bit of clotted blood. Some others were imbibing the stuff. Was that a problem? Did that give them some of the Carmine Beast's power? It was the power more like a role given to the person who had the entirety of meat, fur, and bone. Reluctantly, they left the scene behind. Verona couldn't help but wonder why. Assumed that in a world with fairies who could set plots that spanned centuries and augurs who could see the future, there were no coincidences. Was someone using the distraction of tonight's events to move the body because they'd gotten too close? She didn't want to ask out loud because she couldn't be positive Alpiana or Miss weren't involved. She hated that because she trusted Alpiana as much as she maybe trusted John, which was 8 out of 10 trust. Both Alpiana and John could hurt them if they reverted to instinct, maybe, but yeah, they needed to have a serious meeting. If it was stowed in the ruins, does that mean an other associated with the ruins put it here? Or could someone have put this mess here to make someone else look worse? They continued their circuit around the town and tried to identify the echoes with fresher wounds than the others. They estimated directions, and when one direction seemed to have fresher victims, they trended that way. Lucy's sight helped them identify the damage and get a better sense for the freshness of that damage. The route took them west from the arena. Verona wondered how much time was passing. Her phone had no battery, and it had been charged after school. A ghost of a child sat near the church, bleeding from the neat black wound at its face. Its hands were cupped, holding the portion of its face that the eyes should have been in, but the eyes were missing. It was disintegrating, the top of its head gone. Without the head to go by, Verona couldn't guess at the gender or likely age. "There's a thread," Avery said. She pointed out into the rain. They moved with more energy now. It was a blessing and a curse that this was a place that used their mechanical legs to move. A blessing because it let Avery move her full speed. It wasn't a subtle mire like the spirit world was. But Verona was tired. She trailed behind. Rather than struggle to keep up, she kept to the suggestion from earlier and tried to take in the bigger picture. To look for traps, consider morals, and consider motivations. She watched the flanks of the others as they focused on their singular target. She wanted to be better for Lucy. She didn't know what she wanted in the long term, whether she wanted to be other, or what escape she might seek, or even how she was going to deal with her dad for the next 5 years before she could move out, but for Lucy? For Avery? Yeah, she could focus her attention on that. She'd been happier before that conversation with Lucy yesterday. Happier to have a goal, to be certain in that goal, to have friends at her back. It was hard to avoid feeling a little resentful, even if she knew the resentment was unfair. But she didn't want to be her dad. She didn't want to be a user of people. That was what was fucking with her the most, that she'd almost fallen into that trap. She scanned the surroundings. A glyph hung in the air over the ravine, a midnight blue against a background of black, cloaked in the rain that poured around them. In the middle of that floating glyph was a large eyeball. It blinked as it watched Miss and Alpiana. Verona pushed herself, nearly slipping on the wet ground, the chasm of what should have been road to her left. She fought to catch up to Lucy. "Got a gun?" she asked Lucy. "Gun?" Lucy asked. "Do you?" Up ahead, the others had stopped at a street corner. They might have seen what they were after, but for right now, Verona was focused on watching the flanks, and she'd found something there. "I have a can in my bag." Lucy shrugged out of one strap, letting her bag drop down to where it was more accessible. Verona got it open, reached in until she touched cool aluminum, and pulled out the can, pressing it into Lucy's hand. Lucy made the aluminum, logo-embossed handgun. "Why? Think we might need it?" "Can't explain if we're being watched." "Miss!" Verona called out, tapping Lucy's arm, getting Lucy to stop jogging. The woman with the umbrella turned partially, the umbrella still tilted so the edge of it blocked her face. Verona pointed at the glyph, using her other hand to lift up Lucy's gun, moving it in the same general direction. "Should we destroy it?" The glyph began moving. "With prejudice, if you please," Miss said. Lucy aimed, squaring herself off, her eyes crimson. The glyph swayed, jerking to one side, then the other. Verona pressed one hand against Lucy's ear, one hand against her own, choosing the ears closest to the guns. It fired, loud in the hiss of the rain in this strange place. The bullet didn't hit the eye itself, but it hit the edge of the symbol. The floating symbol with the eye centered in it was shattered, the eyeball dropping out and dissolving much as the echoes had. That will sting, if not partially, temporarily blind her, Miss said. We should finish the task. Finish? Verona asked. She and Lucy caught up to Miss. Lucy tossed the gun into the chasm, and it became a can as it left her hand. Litterer. Guilherme and John will be looking for her, but an augur is well forewarned, Miss said. She will get away unless we do something, and if she gets away, she will likely bring the practitioners of Western Ontario down on our heads, or at least a half-dozen more practiced augurs from her family. You want to kill her? Lucy asked. No, murder will bring its own problems. I think, as dangerous as it may sound after your recent experience with Fairy, we must trust Guilherme to find an answer. For now, we must complicate and confuse as much as we can, and give Guilherme the opportunity to reach her. They met Avery and Alpiana at the corner of the crosswalk. On the opposite corner of the crosswalk, an other was bent over an echo of Melissa, with a destroyed ankle and freshly destroyed eyes. It was long-limbed, its face an expanse of black with no features, and it wore a necklace strung with bleeding eyes. The eyes looked this way and that as the other ducked its head down. One clawed hand reached to the necklace, lifting one draping end away from the neck and over its head. The gunshot alerted it, Avery said. It sees us, but doesn't know what to do about us. If we approach, it might run. It looks fast. I have a card for blinding flashes, Verona told the others. I'm not sure the rain wouldn't wash at the ink, though. Maybe if I kept it dry and got closer, I could try glamour to make an image. We could bait it in with an image of an echo with big juicy eyes. Pug-tear, or eyes like that one actor. It uses eyes unlike yours and senses beyond ours. I think it would not be fooled unless you were very skilled about it. Rain would shorten the duration of the glamour. Lucy bent down over her bag and sorted through it. She pulled out a packet, a folded paper, and she held it closer to her. Trust a fairy to know when we might need something, Lucy said. She looked at Miss. Any tips? Follow the instructions. Trust that a clever use at a dramatic moment may be closer to what she intended than a trap might. I wouldn't have long, Lucy said, if rain washes away glamour. No, less than a minute. What do I do when I get close? Take the necklace? Subdue it. Try not to kill it. Lucy nodded. There were 4 rope bridges at the crosswalk, one for each path that pedestrians might have used to cross. Lucy went after Alpiana. After some consideration, Verona and Avery went along the other bridge to the next corner, until a single rope bridge stretched between them and the other. It went from a 4-limbed crouch to a standing position, tall and looming. It backed away a step. Verona and Avery backed away too, until it eased a bit. It moved the necklace with one hand, the eyeballs darting around and looking at everything nearby. Lucy at the one corner, Verona and Avery at the opposite one. Miss, Verona, and Avery at the opposite one. Miss stood behind them. She murmured, If it returns to the augur with this harvest of eyes, she'll soon have more observation glyphs like the one you destroyed. I imagine she'd be able to keep an eye out for interruptions and disturbances, while harvesters like this collected more eyes. They would be harder to catch off guard like this. Verona looked in Lucy's direction. Lucy was gone. She blinked, searching, looking, and she saw only a blur, a denser patch of rain. The rain washed away, if such a thing could happen, revealing Lucy as she was 2 paces from the other. It scrambled back, away from her, and Alpiana crawled out of the crevice, leaping onto its back, vomiting blackness over its necklace. Avery and Verona ran toward it, but running and a rope bridge made for bad times. They swayed, found their balance and footing, and progressed a bit more carefully. Lucy stuck her knife into the other's calf, then swung an axe that might have been made from a book at the other leg. The other collapsed as Verona and Avery drew close. Together they climbed onto its back. Verona kicked wildly at one elbow as it tried to use a hand to push itself to a standing position. "Make a circle," Miss said. "This will be a very quick lesson in binding." "In this rain?" Lucy asked. She moved forward on her knees, shaking, her eyes wide. She put a knife to the necklace of eyeballs and cut the cord. The other groped blindly as Avery snatched the necklace away. "Find a way. Anything will do. It's defeated. We only need the formality." Verona pulled her bag open and began tearing loose sheets of paper from her bag. She pressed down into the sidewalk, letting the rain wet them down into place. When she was done, Lucy offered her a marker from her own bag. Verona quickly drew out a shaky circle, extending from one piece of paper to the other. By the time she reached the place the circle had started, the permanent ink was kind of bleeding. It wasn't washing away, though. Now demand it return to its master and do its utmost to weaken her and harangue her. "Returning a summoning the same way we might return a curse?" Verona asked. "Exactly so." "Hey, eye thief," Lucy said. She stood on the thing's back, and she did her best to stand upright, back straight, hands on her hips. Her hood was up, her hat was on, but both were soaked. The eyes of the fox mask glowed red. "You heard what she said. Return to the one who summoned you. Ruin her day. Scare her." "Don't kill her," Avery said, her voice muffled by the deer mask. Lucy nodded. "Don't kill her. Slow her down, steal her things, and use your fall talents to make her regret coming this way." "Then forget you saw us, and forget you saw everything here," Verona said. Lucy nodded. The other raised a hand. Verona, sitting on the thing's shoulder, got ready to grab it or kick it at the hand if it tried something. The hand moved, 2 fingers together in a smooth motion. Verona shivered. She wasn't sure why that felt so meaningful. "That's agreement. It is in your power and out of hers," Miss said. "Now let it go." Avery kicked at the papers Verona had laid down. The circle was broken. He moved away from the other. It paused, reaching blindly for the necklace. "If this Nicoletta beats it, she gets the eyes, right?" Verona asked. "Yes. Make do, eye thief," Lucy said. Injured, head bowed, it hobbled away. As it traveled, it picked up speed until the injury seemed to be gone. It disappeared off down the road. "Thank you," Miss said. "We'll have to trust Gilharim to handle the rest. He's canny." "We need more power if we're going to be doing this stuff," Lucy said. "Weapons, the rest of the gifts." "I can only help you with the travel," Alpiana said. "Speaking of, we have no reason to stay here." She put out her hands. Verona took the mare's hand, then took Lucy's. Avery took the other hand. The mare jerked them to another place, much as she'd delivered them to the hall outside Dad's room, then to the Auld Codger Clay's place. From torrential rain into light rain, from cold into dull, humid heat. Verona got her bearings, using her sight to make out the mountains in the dark. They were at the northwestern corner of Kennet. Fast food shops had their glowing signs off to the east. The arena was one of the biggest buildings in Kennet, if not the largest. The lights from the parking lot illuminated it. It's not just that there's a local other that's involved. They're actively working against us now, moving the evidence, or putting bait in front of our noses. Lucy pulled out her phone. She made a face. "I'm already in trouble. Now what? Got any magic tricks for a homicidally angry mom, miss?" "Your mom's nicer than that," Verona told Lucy. She checked her own phone. 2 a.m. Fuck. "I've got to finish me rounds," Alpiana said. "Well done, lassies. Thank you for the assistance rendered." "I look forward to a long working relationship," Avery said. Verona looked at Lucy. Lucy's face had fallen. She held her phone glowing, but it dangled to her left, and fingers that gripped it so lightly it might have fallen into the shallow puddle at Lucy's feet. Oh, the hungry choir ritual had been tonight. It happened at midnight, which meant... Verona reached for Lucy's hand and lifted up the phone, securing it herself. She looked at the screen. Reagan was alive. She'd sent a message and a picture. And she was doomed. It was obvious from the picture, and she'd admitted as such in her own words. The girl they'd saved. Somehow the girl who had been lying in a sobbing heap last Tuesday had won tonight. She'd taken 7 different things from the other 7 competitors and swallowed them. A twist of hair, meat on the bone, a gulp of blood. In the doing she'd claimed 7 eyes, including Reagan's remaining one. The hungry choir had its newest winner. This has been a fan-made chapter reading of the web serial Pale by J.C. McCrae, read by me, Robin. If you'd like to donate to the author, please go to patreon.com/wildbow. Thank you for listening. This has been a fan-made chapter reading of the web serial Pale by J.C. McCrae, read by me, Robin. If you'd like to donate to the author, please go to patreon.com/wildbow. Thank you for listening.